The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song, casting everything in that peculiar institutional white that made skin look like paper. Rachel Torres ran her cloth across the security checkpoint counter at Portland International Airport, the movements precise and methodical, wrist rotating in controlled arcs, pressure applied evenly across the stainless steel surface. Her Navy TSA uniform vest hung crisp and official, but underneath, her shoulders carried the kind of stillness that comes from having learned to breathe through mortar fire. She'd been wiping down checkpoints for 14 months now. 14 months of travelers rushing past with their liquids and electronics, their complaints about wait times, their casual disregard for the fact that she was standing between them and anything that might go wrong. The job paid $34,000 a year. Her major's pension paid double that, but she couldn't touch the full amount without the questions starting, without the paperwork that would lead to medical evaluations and disability hearings and people wanting to know what she could and couldn't do anymore. The TSA uniform was simpler. No one asked why she moved the way she did, why her right leg followed a fractional second behind the left, why she positioned herself at every checkpoint with sight lines to all 3 exits. The limp was barely noticeable anymore. The femur had healed. The femur always healed. What didn't heal was the muscle memory of running downrange with 2 wounded Marines draped across her shoulders, the smell of diesel fuel and burning rubber and something else, something she'd learned to classify as not her problem anymore. She adjusted her vest and moved to the next checkpoint, pushing that memory back into the compartment where she kept most things that mattered. Her name badge was clipped to her pocket. Rachel Torres, it read in that official sans serif font. TSA Security Officer. Nothing underneath that. No rank, no unit designation, no blood type that still matched the military's database. Above her collarbone, just visible if you looked carefully at the edge of her uniform collar, sat the beginning of a scar that ran from her shoulder to somewhere that TSA uniforms covered. A roadside bomb in Sangin Province, Helm and Valley. An IED that had detonated at 03 for 7 hours on a Tuesday morning in 2016. The blast had lifted a Humvee weighing 6,300 pounds off the ground and dropped it like a toy. She'd been the medic. She'd been the one supposed to get everyone else out. She'd been the one everyone wanted to know about later when she finally made it stateside. Rachel positioned herself at checkpoint 3, where the early morning crowd was already building, business travelers in suits, families heading to the coast, a few military personnel in uniform heading back to base. She watched the crowd the way she'd been trained to watch crowds, not scanning, but observing. Not looking for threats, but understanding the geometry of the space, the flow of movement, the places where pressure built and released. That's when she saw Terminal Security Chief Marcus Webb. He stood near Gate C7, about 60 feet away, moving with the kind of deliberate purpose that suggested something had just gone wrong. Webb was a tall man with the build of someone who'd spent time in a gym to compensate for an absence of anything else. He carried himself with the stiffness of someone perpetually convinced that the world was watching. He wore the charcoal uniform of Portland International Security Department, the kind that came with authority badges and radio privileges and the kind of institutional power that made people defer to him at departmental meetings. What made Rachel's attention stick was the maintenance crew behind him. A team of 4 workers in grey coveralls was removing equipment from Gate C7, medical equipment. She could see the shape of it even from this distance, the distinctive profile of portable cardiac monitoring devices being wheeled into a stainless steel cart. The timestamp on the work order they'd submitted that morning had read 2 p.m. hours. The maintenance crew was working at 8:41. Rachel had processed the gate closure herself at the checkpoint 15 minutes ago. The closure request had been filed for that afternoon slot, not this morning. She'd marked it in the system at 0630 when she'd started her shift. The work order didn't match. Webb made a phone call, the handset pressed against his ear, his eye sweeping across the terminal. When his gaze passed over Rachel, it paused. Not for long, maybe 2 seconds, barely enough for a civilian to notice. But Rachel had spent 7 years in the Army Rangers, which meant she'd spent 7 years understanding what it meant when someone's attention suddenly sharpened. Webb's jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. His free hand dropped to his belt, not threatening, but proprietary, the gesture of a man reminding himself that he carried the authority to make decisions in this space. Then he finished his call and turned back to the maintenance crew, barking something she couldn't hear from this distance. Rachel went back to wiping the checkpoint. Her movements didn't change. Her breathing didn't change. The cloth moved across the stainless steel with the same even pressure it had maintained before, because that's what composure meant. It meant understanding that being noticed was sometimes worse than being ignored, and that the only way to handle being noticed by someone like Webb was to pretend it had never happened. But something had shifted. She could feel it the way she'd once felt an IED before it detonated, not as a physical sensation, but as a change in the air pressure, a subtle alteration in the way the world was arranged. The checkpoint counter was clean now. Sterile. The kind of clean that looked like nothing had ever happened on it, like no one had ever placed their hands there, like the surface itself was untouched and unremarkable. Rachel moved down to checkpoint 2 and began again. The cloth made a soft squeaking sound against the metal, a rhythmic whisper that had become almost meditative over the past 14 months. Squeak. Wipe. Rotate. Squeak. The pattern of it had the same precision as the way she'd learned to pack medical equipment, the same attention to detail that had once meant the difference between someone living and someone not. Around her, Portland International continued its morning routine. A TSA agent waved someone through the metal detector. An alarm chimed as a traveler forgot to remove their watch. The intercom crackled with a flight status update, United 1247 for San Francisco now boarding at gate C3. Everything normal. Everything standard. Everything exactly as it had been for the past 14 months, unchanged and unexceptional. Behind gate C7, the maintenance crew finished loading the medical equipment and pulled the cart away, disappearing down the corridor that led toward the administrative offices. Rachel didn't watch them go. She kept her eyes on the checkpoint in front of her, on the cloth and the metal and the methodical way that cleanliness could be maintained if you simply committed yourself to the task. The scar on her shoulder burned the way old scars sometimes did, not with pain exactly, but with a kind of phantom awareness, like her body remembered things that her mind had filed away in compartments marked not now and deal with it later. 14 months of not now. 14 months of dealing with it later, or not dealing with it at all, depending on what day it was and whether she'd woken up from the kinds of dreams that came in the middle of the night when the compartments weren't sealed quite tight enough. She'd been a major in the Army Rangers. She'd led 214 soldiers in 3 combat tours across Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the border regions where the maps weren't very clear and the rules of engagement were written in blood and training and the kind of decisiveness that came when you understood that hesitation could get people killed. She'd trained for 7 years to be good at keeping people alive in circumstances where staying alive was statistically unlikely. She'd been so good at it that she'd been promoted twice, had earned a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart and a citation that used the phrase "extraordinary valor under fire" in official documents that sat in a locked box underneath her bed. Then a roadside bomb had taken all of that away. Not the training. The training never went away. The training lived in her joints and her muscle memory and the way she positioned her body in spaces. The training lived in the scar tissue where the femur had broken and healed, in the slight hitch in her gait that would never completely disappear, in the way she moved through the world like someone who understood that the world could rearrange itself into something dangerous without warning. But the career had gone away. The authority had gone away. The uniform had gone away, replaced by this TSA vest and this name badge and this job that paid $34,000 a year and required her to pretend that she'd never been anything other than a woman who wiped down security checkpoints at Portland International Airport. 14 months of pretending. The checkpoint was clean now. Rachel straightened up and rolled her shoulders, feeling the familiar twist of scar tissue underneath her uniform. Inside her jacket lining, sewn beneath the fabric where no one could see it, was a faded unit patch from her Army Ranger company. A tiny piece of embroidered olive drab with her unit insignia, barely 2 inches across, tucked into the seam where the lining met the jacket body. She'd sewn it there herself, using a needle and thread from a travel kit, on the day she'd first put on the TSA uniform. A talisman. A reminder. A truth that lived in the dark where the fluorescent lights couldn't reach it. She touched the spot where the patch lived, just for a moment, just long enough to feel the texture of the embroidery beneath the fabric. Then she let her hand drop and moved to the next checkpoint. Behind her, somewhere near gate C7, Rachel heard Webb's voice rise, not shouting, but sharp, the kind of authoritative tone that suggested he was giving an order to people he expected to obey immediately. The maintenance crew's response was inaudible from where she stood, but the sound of wheels rolling away from the gate came clear enough. The medical equipment was gone. The discrepancy in the work order had been addressed. Whatever had needed attention had been handled. But Marcus Webb's attention hadn't moved away from her. She could feel it, the way she could feel a lot of things that other people seemed to miss. She could feel the quality of his observation, the way it landed on her with a kind of significance that suggested he'd taken note of something, filed it away in whatever part of his mind kept track of people who paid attention to things they shouldn't. Rachel wiped down checkpoint 4. The cloth was soft now, worn from the repetition of the morning routine. The metal surface gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The airport moved around her like it always did, travelers rushing, announcements droning, the subtle background hum of an institution in motion. And somewhere beneath it all, in the parts of herself that she kept compartmentalized and sealed away, something shifted. Something that had nothing to do with the femur, nothing to do with the 14 months of working as a TSA officer, nothing to do with the faded unit patch sewn into her jacket lining. Something that recognized the moment when her civilian life had just become more complicated. The overhead page crackles through every speaker in the terminal at 7:34 in the morning, the kind of announcement that makes everyone stop moving at the exact same moment. Cleanup needed at checkpoint for Torres the toilet scrubber. The words hang in the recycled airport air like smoke. Laughter ripples through security, not from travelers, but from her own team. From Webb's team now. 12 voices she recognizes. Marcus Webb stands near the TSA checkpoint with his arms crossed, watching her face the way a predator watches prey that doesn't yet know it's been marked. Rachel walks past them without breaking stride. Her checkpoint supervisor badge catches the fluorescent glare above her as she moves, navy uniform pressed despite the 7 a.m. shift, the faded unit patch beneath her jacket lining pressing against her ribs like a second heartbeat. She takes one measured breath. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. The kind of breathing they taught her in Sangin when mortars were close enough to shake the dirt from the sandbags. The kind of breathing that means you don't respond to insults. You don't respond to humiliation. You respond only when the situation demands it. She continues to her post, her steps neither faster nor slower, and doesn't acknowledge a single laugh. Webb finds her that afternoon in the supply room where cleaning chemicals line the shelves like little plastic soldiers, where the fluorescent strips buzz with that electric hum that makes the back of her skull ache. He steps through the doorway and closes the door behind him with the deliberate care of someone who doesn't want witnesses. The room suddenly feels smaller. He moves close enough that she smells coffee on his breath, the kind of proximity designed to intimidate, designed to make someone feel cornered. You ask questions about things that don't concern you, Torres, he says, and his voice carries the tone of a man who has made people disappear from payroll before. I'll have you transferred to the overnight cargo shift so fast your head spins. You understand me. He steps closer still, his shoulders broader than they need to be, his posture engineered to take up space. You think anyone here respects a washed-up security guard with a limp? You think they're going to help you? They're laughing at you. Have been since the day you walked in. Rachel meets his eyes. She doesn't look away. She doesn't look down. The trembling isn't fear. The trembling, if there were any, would be restraint, the kind that comes from someone who has held a bleeding Marine in both arms while bullets punched through the metal of their vehicle and her hands stayed steady. But she doesn't tremble. She just stands there, silent, her jaw tight enough to bite through stone. She lets the silence grow between them the way pressure builds in a closed container, and Webb is the first to step back. The shift change happens the next day in the parking lot where the Portland rain falls sideways, where planes take off beyond the chain-link fence and the sky is the color of old concrete. Webb waits until the moment when everyone is moving through, 7 security officers, for TSA agents, 12 baggage handlers, the operations manager, a maintenance supervisor, and Rachel. 23 people. He times it perfectly. He always does. Torres. Your badge. He doesn't ask. It isn't a request. The tone carries the weight of someone who has authority and knows exactly how to use it, the way a knife knows how to cut. Effective immediately, you're reassigned to baggage screening. Hand it over. Now. The badge is still clipped to her vest. It's a small thing, maybe 3 inches of laminated plastic and metal, her photo from 3 months ago when she still believed in this job, her name printed in the kind of font that looks official. She reaches up and unpins it, and the action is deliberate, controlled, the way a soldier removes patches from a uniform. The metal pin slides free. The badge comes away from the fabric. One tear escapes. Just one. She doesn't know where it comes from, doesn't know if it's anger or grief or something worse, something that comes from knowing that you've survived worse and still somehow ended up here, in a Portland parking lot, surrendering authority to a man who couldn't lead a fire drill. She wipes it away without breaking eye contact, and when she speaks, her voice is quiet enough that only Webb and maybe 2 others can hear. I've been stripped of more important things by better men than you. Webb smirks. The smirk is meant to wound, meant to show that he's won. Get used to the parking garage, Torres. It's where you belong. She takes the new post 3 hours later, in the hourly parking structure where the rain hammers the concrete roof like distant applause, where the chain-link fence separates the screening area from the tarmac and Rachel can watch the planes take off through the gaps, watch them climb toward weather systems she'll never be part of again. The baggage conveyor belt moves with mechanical precision. Scanner after scanner. Bag after bag. No authority. No supervisor status. Just a woman in a Navy uniform pushing luggage through X-ray machines while the sky presses down and the rain keeps falling. She's on hour 4 of the shift, her femur aching the way it always does when the weather turns, when screams echo from inside the terminal building. Not distant screams. Not the kind that happen every few hours in an airport. These are the kind of screams that cut through everything else, pure panic, pure terror, the sound of someone's body giving up in real time. Rachel doesn't think. The thinking part is miles away now, locked behind doors she closed a long time ago. She moves. Her legs respond even though her right femur is held together by titanium and memory and sheer stubbornness. She runs toward the terminal, through the baggage area, past security checkpoints where Webb is already radioing for medical, his voice sharp and efficient, at least, at the parts of his job that don't involve destroying people. Delta check-in counter. The elderly man in the business suit is on the floor, convulsing, his lips turning blue, his body moving in ways bodies shouldn't move. Travelers scatter like birds. The airport's medical response team stands frozen, their AED machine flashing error codes on its screen, the equipment failing in the moment it's needed most. No one is moving. No one is helping. No one knows what to do. Rachel drops to her knees, the impact sharp against the tile, her hands already moving. She rips open his shirt, the buttons scatter, and her eyes catalogue everything. Deviated trachea. Bulging neck veins. Chest not moving on the right side. The man gasps like he's drowning in air that won't reach his lungs because his own collapsed lung is pushing everything to the left, compressing his heart, suffocating him from the inside. Tension pneumothorax. The kind of injury she learned to recognize in Sangin when a Marine was dying in the back of a Humvee and her hands were the only thing between him and a body bag. A businessman offers his pocket knife without being asked. The crowd gasps. Rachel doesn't. She takes the knife, sterilizes the blade with hand sanitizer someone shoves into her palm, and her fingers find the intercostal space with the muscle memory of someone who has done this before, someone for whom this motion lives in her bones like a second language. She needs something hollow. A woman in the crowd pulls a pen from her purse, shaking, and hands it over. Rachel disassembles it with movements that come from somewhere deeper than thought, the barrel, the cartridge, leaving just the hollow plastic tube. Someone yells for her to stop. She doesn't stop. She presses the pen casing into the space between the ribs, into the space where the air is trapped, where death is only seconds away from becoming inevitable. The hiss of air escaping. The man's chest expands like someone turning a valve on a pressure cooker. His lips shift from blue toward pink. Color floods back into his face like someone threw a switch. His eyes flutter open just as sirens wail outside the terminal and military police in dress uniforms rush through the automatic doors, their movement synchronized, their presence carrying the weight of the kind of authority that Rachel understands in her bones. She's kneeling on the ground, her hand steady, her breath even, the pen casing still in her hand and the blood on her fingers looking like evidence of a crime that was actually an act of grace. The screams reached the baggage garage before Rachel did. Not the normal shriek of a missed flight or a lost suitcase, this was the sound of something collapsing inside a human body, the kind of raw panic that echoed off concrete and made every spine within earshot clench tight. Rachel dropped the duffel bag she'd been scanning, her hands already moving toward the source before her brain finished processing what her bones already knew. 3 days since Webb had stripped her badge in front of 12 colleagues. 3 days of pushing luggage carts in the parking garage while passengers walked past without seeing her. 3 days of swallowing the thing that wanted to climb out of her chest and remind everyone exactly who they were pretending not to notice. She moved through the terminal corridors like muscle memory made flesh. The TSA uniform vest hung loose on her shoulders now, marking her as nobody, just another employee in navy blue among the 100 others pushing carts and scanning tickets and pretending the airport was a normal place where normal people did normal work. But her legs remembered Sangin. Her eyes remembered the triage field with the heat rising off desert sand and the smell of diesel fuel mixing with copper. Her hands remembered what they had been trained to do before a roadside bomb had rewritten her future in a single split second. The Delta check-in counter had transformed into chaos. An elderly man lay on the marble floor, his body convulsing in that terrible arrhythmic way that meant his nervous system was screaming for oxygen it wasn't getting. His face had turned a shade of blue that Rachel had seen before, not in textbooks, but in the field, in the tent with the canvas walls flapping in Afghan wind and the smell of antiseptic cutting through everything else. A woman, his wife, maybe, or was screaming for help. The airport's medical response team stood frozen 3 feet away, their AED useless in their hands, the machine beeping its mechanical complaint, defib pads applied incorrectly. Malfunction. Error. Try again. They didn't know what they were standing next to. Rachel dropped to her knees beside the man without removing her vest. The sound of her knee hitting tile was sharp, precise, percussion in a symphony of panic. She ripped open his shirt, buttons scattering across the floor like confession, and her eyes moved across his chest with the clinical speed of someone who had made the same calculation 53 times in combat. The left side of his ribcage wasn't moving. The trachea was shifted. The neck veins were distended like ropes pulled tight in a ship's rigging. Tension pneumothorax. His right lung was collapsing like a building losing its structural supports, each breath compressing his heart further, suffocating him from the inside out. The businessman in the $3,000 suit was standing closest. Rachel looked up at him, and something in her expression, something that had nothing to do with the TSA uniform and everything to do with the things she'd learned before she learned how to be a civilian, made him pull a pocket knife from his belt without being asked. She took it. Her hands were steady. The trembling people saw was never fear. It was always restraint. She borrowed a Bic pen from a nearby gate agent, the plastic cool in her palm, familiar in a way that almost made her want to laugh. Combat medic training condensed into a ballpoint and a borrowed knife. She'd done this with a tracheotomy tube and a flashlight once, in a tent where the generator was failing and a Marine was drowning in his own blood. She'd done this with her own hands and a prayer she didn't believe in anymore. The needle went in. Second intercostal space. Midclavicular line. The anatomy was the same whether you were in a field hospital in Sangin Province or a commercial airport in Portland, Oregon. Whether you were Major Rachel Torres or just another baggage screener nobody bothered to notice. The pen casing replaced the needle, channeling the trapped air out of his pleural space with a sound like the last breath of something dying. The hiss. The release. The immediate, desperate gasp as oxygen flooded back into his collapsed lung. His eyes snapped open. He was alive. His chest was rising. His color was changing from that terrible blue to something approaching human. The wife was crying. The businessman was staring at his own knife in her hands like he'd forgotten what it was supposed to do. The medical response team was standing there with their defective AED, finally remembering how to move, finally understanding that someone else had already done the job they were trained for and failed. That was when the sirens wailed. Not ambulance sirens. The sound was different, sharper, more deliberate. Military police vehicles. Rachel heard the tires cutting across the airport service entrance with the kind of speed that meant authority backed by institutional weight. The automatic doors burst open and 4 officers in dress uniforms moved into the terminal with synchronized precision, their dress blues carrying the kind of presence that made civilians instinctively step back. Colonels, she thought, or close to it. The kind of rank that didn't show up for a simple medical emergency unless the medical emergency was someone who mattered. The oldest of them went directly to the elderly man. Not toward the medical response team. Not toward the businessman. Directly to the man Rachel had just brought back from the edge of whatever comes after. General Whitmore, sir. The officer's voice was quiet, respectful, careful. How are you feeling, sir? General. Rachel didn't move. Didn't look up. Her hands were still holding the improvised decompression kit, still covered in the thin shine of the man's perspiration and adrenaline. Her vest was still marked TSA. Her name tag still said Torres, and beneath that tag, sewn into the inside of her uniform jacket, was the faded unit patch from the 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. 3 gold stars on a memorial wall. 8 faces in a photograph that didn't get to keep living. And now a general. A young officer moved through the crowd toward the man on the stretcher. Captain's bars. Air Force. But something about the shape of his face and the angle of his jaw and the way his eyes moved from General Whitmore to Rachel and then back again like he was running calculations in his head that he didn't have the answer to, something that made him stop moving entirely. He stared at her hands. At the pen casing. At her face. His mouth opened. His eyes widened by maybe a 1/4 inch. Nothing visible to anyone who wasn't trained to see the way people looked when they'd just realized something that changed the mathematics of everything they thought they understood. Where did you learn to do that? His voice was quiet. Carefully controlled. The voice of someone who'd been trained to keep composure in situations that didn't warrant it. Before Rachel could answer, and she was about to say something bland about first aid certifications because that's what you said when you were wearing a TSA uniform and your former rank was supposed to stay former, Dr. Caldwell appeared beside the general's stretcher like a man who'd been summoned by the mere fact of crisis existing in his airport. This woman assaulted a passenger. Caldwell's voice cut across the terminal like a blade. She used an unauthorized medical procedure without proper credentials. I want her arrested. The words hung in the air. Rachel felt them the way she'd felt the blast wave from the IED in Sangin, not as sound exactly, but as a pressure change. A fundamental shift in the atmosphere around her body. General Whitmore, weak but conscious on the stretcher, tried to sit up. She saved my life. I was dead. She brought me back. Sir, you're in shock. Caldwell's tone suggested he was speaking to a confused child. This employee violated 17 protocols. 17. She's not a doctor. She had no authorization. The liability exposure alone. I don't care about liability. The general's voice was stronger now, the oxygen restoring something to him. This woman is a hero. The airport police were already moving toward Rachel. Not running. Just that steady walk that meant they'd been given an order and they were going to execute it. The businessman was backing away from her, his knife still in her hand. The wife was looking at her like she'd sprouted wings. The young captain, the general's son, Rachel was certain now, was moving his mouth as though he wanted to say something, his eyes still tracking hers, still searching. Come with us, the first officer said. His name tag said Patterson. He was 60, maybe, with the tired eyes of someone who'd worked airport security for 20 years and never had anything interesting happen until the moment he had to arrest the woman who'd saved a general's life. The airport director had arrived, looking like he'd swallowed glass. Behind him came 3 more people in suits and lanyards, legal, probably. Risk management. The people who existed to make sure incidents like this were converted into liability reports. Rachel stood slowly, releasing the pen casing to a paramedic who'd finally arrived and was actually competent enough to understand what had been done and what it meant. She placed the businessman's knife on the stretcher beside the general's leg, and their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. His were full of water. Gratitude and something else. Something older than gratitude. Something that looked like recognition. She went with the police officers without being asked twice. Through the terminal, past the crowds that had gathered and the phones recording her exit, down the corridors to the security office where she was handed a termination letter printed on official airport letterhead. The word swam in front of her: violation of safety protocols, unauthorized medical procedures, conduct unbecoming of TSA personnel, terminated for cause, effective immediately. 20 minutes later, Rachel stood at the security office desk and collected her belongings, a cracked coffee mug from her locker that someone had given her 8 years ago when she'd first started this job, a dying succulent on a windowsill that she'd kept alive through sheer spite, and a photograph in a weathered frame. 8 faces. Smiling at the camera in front of a tent in Sangin Province. Laughter frozen in time before 3 of those faces became names on a memorial wall at Arlington. Before one of those faces became someone sitting at a desk in a Portland airport security office, processing her own termination. That night, she stood at a rain-soaked bus stop, the cardboard box holding her entire civilian identity balanced against her leg. The rain fell like applause, cold and relentless, soaking through her TSA uniform while she waited for the 11:41 p.m. bus that would take her to a motel room where she could figure out what came next. She had no idea the phone call was already coming. No idea that what had happened in the terminal was already being documented in at least 43 surveillance videos. No idea that a general who'd spent 40 years in the Army Reserve had just picked up his phone in the back of an ambulance and started making calls to people who made other people's problems disappear. No idea that everything was about to change. Webb appeared within the hour. Not through the main entrance where the chaos was still unfolding, through the back corridor where hospital staff moved between floors and parking levels, invisible to the world. He was carrying a manila folder pressed against his chest like armor. His face had the look of a man who'd already scripted this moment 17 times in his head, and he was executing flawlessly. Rachel was being held in the security office on the 4th floor of the administrative wing, the one nobody visits unless something has gone catastrophically wrong. The door opened. Webb walked in with the airport director trailing behind him, her expression apologetic and terrified in equal measure. Webb didn't sit. He stood at the edge of the desk with the posture of a man delivering news that would change someone's life. Major Torres, he said, and Rachel's entire body went rigid at the title. He shouldn't have known that word. Webb smiled, understanding that he'd made his first mistake and knowing he'd already committed to the next 10. Let's talk about what really happened at the Delta counter. He opened the folder. Inside were photographs of the general being loaded into the ambulance, medical reports with timestamps, and something worse, a complaint form dated that morning, filled out in the airport director's handwriting. This passenger initiated contact with security before the medical event occurred. He was known to our systems as a potential liability. When you intervened without authorization, without waiting for medical personnel, without following protocol, you assaulted a passenger in front of 40 witnesses. You violated HIPAA by touching him without consent. You contaminated a potential crime scene. Rachel didn't move. Didn't blink. The kind of stillness that comes from having already survived the worst. Webb continued, his words picking up speed now, feeding on his own momentum. The general is claiming you saved his life. That's not a defense. That's a complication. Because now we have witnesses who saw you assault him, a hospital record that contradicts his statement, and a protocol violation that's documented in our system. He slid the folder across the desk. You're terminated for cause. Effective immediately. You'll turn over your badge, your security clearance, and your parking pass. You'll exit through the south entrance within 30 minutes. If you attempt to contact any of the staff, any of the passengers, or anyone associated with this incident, we'll file a civil suit for breach of security protocols." The airport director made a small sound, something between apology and protest. Webb silenced her with a look that said he'd already handled her objections 3 times over the phone. Rachel stood. She picked up the folder. She set it back down on the desk without opening it. "Is that everything?" Her voice came out level. A metronome. No tremor. No pleading. No indignation. Just a question, asked with the tone of someone asking about the weather. Webb blinked. For just a moment, his script faltered. He'd expected tears, denial, the kind of emotional response that would validate his narrative. What he got was absolute composure, the kind that looks like agreement but sounds like goodbye. "That's everything," he said, but there was uncertainty in it now. Rachel walked past him toward the door. The airport director called out softly, "Your personal items are in a box in the security office." The box was exactly what Rachel expected, a cardboard container from the break room supply closet, the kind that usually held paper cups or coffee filters. Inside was a cracked ceramic mug that had been hers since Fort Bragg, a dying succulent she'd kept on her locker shelf for 2 years, and a photograph in a plastic frame. 8 faces in army dress uniforms, standing in front of a helicopter. 3 of them had gold stars drawn across them in marker, a notation made by someone who couldn't bear the permanence of actual names. Her unit. Dark Horse Platoon. The ones who came home and the ones who didn't. She carried the box down the concrete stairwell instead of the elevator, her limp more pronounced now, pain radiating up her femur where the surgeons had reassembled her with titanium and hope. The rain started before she reached the street. Not a drizzle, the kind of downpour that comes from the Pacific, cold and insistent and indifferent to who was standing underneath it. The bus stop at 14th and Morrison had a broken shelter, the kind that protects nothing. Rachel stood there with the cardboard box at her feet, rain hammering the asphalt around her shoes like applause from a hostile audience. A man waiting for the bus looked at her, then looked away. She'd seen that look 1,000 times, the civilian gaze that registers visible suffering and immediately chooses not to see it. Her phone had buzzed twice since she'd arrived. A text from her landlord about the rent due on the 1st. Nothing from anyone else. The next morning she filled out applications at 6 different hospitals in the Portland metro area. Mercy General. Mount Sinai Grace. 3 smaller urgent care facilities that probably wouldn't even run background checks. By afternoon she'd submitted 12 more. By Friday she'd sent applications to every medical facility within 50 miles that would accept her without a reference from Portland International. None of them called. Saturday morning there was an email from Mercy General's HR department, a form letter thanking her for her interest, but they decided to move forward with other candidates. Nothing from Mount Sinai. Nothing from the others. Monday the rejection emails started arriving in clusters, as if someone had made a phone call that rippled outward. After careful review of your background screening, we've determined that your qualifications don't align with our current needs. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. The pattern was clear. Every hospital system in the state was receiving the same message through the same channels. Whoever this woman was, she'd burned a bridge somewhere significant. 2 weeks passed like a construction crane lowering something heavy into an empty grave. Rachel's savings account dropped by $1,500. Her landlord sent a second text. She sent half the rent with a note that the rest was coming. It wasn't. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning at 6:19 a.m., and the subject line made her hands go still on her coffee mug. Urgent, security clearance verification required. The sender was Portland International's parent authority, a company registered in Delaware that Rachel had never heard of before. The message was brief but specific. During routine employment screening, the background check for Rachel M. Torres, DOB the 14th of August, 1992, has flagged an active classified security clearance inconsistent with stated employment history. Federal regulations require immediate verification and clarification. Please provide documentation of current clearance status and authorization for civilian airport employment within 48 hours, or your employment file will be held pending investigation. Rachel read it 3 times. She understood what it meant. The military system had cross-referenced her civilian background check with medical databases when the General's hospital records from Oak Creek Memorial were transmitted. Military medical files were classified. Her rank was classified. Her service record was sealed. None of that should have shown up in a civilian employment system. But someone had made it show up. Someone inside the military apparatus had flagged her file. Someone with access to Pentagon databases had sent a signal that said, "This woman is not what she appears to be." The signal had bounced through Portland International's administrative infrastructure like a sonar ping returning to sender. And now Dr. Webb Caldwell was receiving his own email from the same address, the same timestamp, asking him to come to an emergency meeting in the airport director's office immediately. He was reading the email at his desk in the security office when the first of the calls started coming through. Not civilian calls. Institutional calls. Military police on the other end of the line, asking about his meeting with Major Rachel Torres. He was still processing that rank, Major, when Captain Derek Whitmore walked through his office door wearing dress blues and the kind of expression that men learn in military academies where they teach you to deliver news that ends careers. The room went so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights hum overhead, a sound like distant machinery warning of something approaching. Heroes walk among us. Sometimes in scrub saving lives in the dark. Webb's glass-walled office. Captain Derek Whitmore stands in full dress uniform, medals catching the fluorescent light like promises kept. The airport director trembles. Rachel stands motionless, one hand resting on the back of a chair, her breathing steady as a metronome. Whitmore steps forward. His voice drops. "You're looking at Major Rachel Torres. Army Rangers." The silence expands. Webb's face goes pale. The director's hands shake as she opens a classified file folder, the kind with red borders that civilians rarely see. She begins to read aloud, her voice cracking on each line. Purple Heart. Pause. Rachel doesn't move. Bronze Star with Valor. Another pause. The director's eyes widen as she continues. 23 combat saves in Sangin Province. 23. Webb grips the edge of his desk hard enough that his knuckles go white. A Navy SEAL liaison officer walks through the door in dress whites, his bearing like a knife through butter, all precision, all presence. He flew in from Virginia this morning. His voice carries the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. Major Torres was leading a joint operation when an IED took out her vehicle. She still dragged 2 wounded Marines a quarter-mile under fire before calling in the medevac that saved 6 lives. 6. While bleeding out from a shattered femur. The SEAL lieutenant steps beside Rachel without looking at her. It's a gesture of respect. The room feels smaller. The fluorescent lights hum their monotonous drone. An FBI assistant director enters from the corridor, his suit pressed sharp enough to cut, his jaw set like a man who's been waiting for this moment. He reads charges from a prepared statement without inflection, the voice of institutional reckoning. Chief Webb has been under investigation for 4 months for insurance fraud. Staging fake passenger injuries. Filing claims through a shell company registered in his sister's name. We recovered 47 fraudulent claims totaling $812,000. He pauses. Major Torres witnessed him moving fabricated evidence from Gate C7 3 days before she saved General Whitmore's life. That's why he tried to eliminate her credibility. That's why he filed false assault charges. She was a witness he needed to destroy. Webb's breathing becomes shallow. The FBI director continues without mercy. We have airport security footage. We have financial records. We have 17 employees willing to testify that Webb offered them money to corroborate his story against her. The door opens. A phone call is being patched through the intercom system. General Whitmore's voice booms from the speakers, strong enough that it shakes the air in the room. He's calling from Oak Creek Memorial's cardiac unit, 48 hours post-surgery, and his voice is a sledgehammer wrapped in velvet. That woman saved my life with a pen and a pocket knife when your medical response team stood frozen with their broken equipment. And this man, his voice sharpens to a blade, tried to destroy her for doing her job because she witnessed his crimes. I want him in handcuffs. I want his pension seized. I want every fraudulent claim he ever filed investigated by the full weight of federal authority. She's a major in the United States Army Rangers. She's a Purple Heart recipient. And you treated her like a janitor. The line goes dead. The silence is absolute. Webb reaches for his phone. The FBI director shakes his head. Don't. Webb's hand freezes mid-air. His face has gone the color of old concrete. The airport director slides a printed email across the desk. It's time-stamped from this morning, 6:24 a.m. Webb had scheduled a press conference for 10 a.m. He was going to accuse Rachel Torres of reckless endangerment. He was going to demand her prosecution. He was going to stand in front of local news cameras with a prepared statement calculated to destroy her reputation completely. That press conference is happening right now. But Webb doesn't know what's about to happen to him. Outside the office, through the windows, Rachel can see the televisions in the departure lounge. Local news anchors are broadcasting live from Webb's original press conference venue. Webb's associate takes the podium, unprepared for what's about to unfold, and begins reading the prepared statement. The camera cuts to a phone feed. General Whitmore appears on screen from his hospital bed, a line still in his arm, and his voice comes through the speakers like thunder rolling across a valley. He repeats what he just said in this office. Word for word. But now 50 million people are watching. The broadcast shows Webb's original press conference footage simultaneously, his opening statement where he calls Rachel an untrained employee who endangered a passenger's life with unauthorized medical procedures. The camera captures his face in real time as the phone feed cuts in. As the general speaks. As the world watches him collapse. The news anchors begin asking questions he can't answer. The FBI director appears on the second camera feed. Charges. Evidence. Arrest warrants. Airport security footage plays across 3 screens showing Webb meeting with co-conspirators in the parking garage. Showing him moving equipment. Showing him reviewing fraudulent claim paperwork. The press conference devolves into controlled chaos. Reporters shout over each other. Webb is led out in handcuffs as photographers' flash cameras explode like artillery. His face is the color of ash. That night, the story burns through every news cycle in the country. War hero fired for saving 4-star general's life, boss arrested for massive fraud. The footage of General Whitmore's call goes viral. Millions of people watch Webb's face collapse in real time. Millions of people see a 4-star general in a hospital bed calling for justice. Millions of people watch Rachel Torres standing in the background of that office, completely composed, one hand still resting on the chair, breathing steady as a metronome. She doesn't smile. She doesn't cry. She watches the man who tried to destroy her get handcuffed on live television, and her expression doesn't change. That's when people realize who they were looking at. That's when the comment sections explode with questions. Who is she? What unit? How many tours? The Army's Public Affairs Office releases a brief statement confirming her service record. Within 6 hours, her Ranger unit's memorial page gets 10,000 visitors. 3 of her 8 teammates' names are listed with gold stars. She doesn't look at those when she reads it that night. She can't. Not yet. But that's coming. 6 months later, the airport's main terminal has transformed. A new section has opened along Concourse C. A bronze plaque reads Portland International Airport Veteran Services Center, dedicated to those who served and continue to serve. Rachel Torres walks through in the navy blue uniform of Deputy Security Director, her new badge catching the light. The pin on her collar is a major's insignia. Behind her, a glass-walled office, her office now. She's been designing a veteran hiring program for 3 months. 42 former service members have already been placed in positions ranging from security to administration to customer service. The airport director stands with her, along with Captain Derek Whitmore in his Marine Corps dress uniform. His father, General Whitmore, recovered fully from his cardiac arrest. He's back to full-duty command now. Back to leading. Back to the life that Rachel's hand saved. Whitmore shakes her hand firmly, the kind of grip that military men understand, solid, respectful, real. My father wanted me to tell you he's back to full duty, Major. Because of you. Rachel nods. One word. Good. Outside in the hourly parking garage, 3 levels down, Marcus Webb sits at a folding table under a faded insurance company banner. Rain hammers the parking structure like applause. His laminated badge reads independent agent in letters that are already fading. The fraud conviction ended his security career completely. No airport will hire him. No government agency will touch him. The insurance company let him work off-site because even they didn't want him in their office. Selling policies to desperate travelers who need 20 minutes of coverage. That's all he has left. Travelers hurry past his table without a glance, their luggage wheels clicking on wet concrete. He sits alone under flickering fluorescent lights, watching people who have somewhere to go. Somewhere to be. Somewhere that matters. Inside the terminal, Rachel pauses at the window overlooking the parking structure. She sees him there. She recognizes him immediately. She looks at him for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turns away. She feels nothing. That's not cruelty. That's closure. She walks back into the ceremony where 50 employees, many of them veterans she hired personally, stand at attention in their new uniforms. Some of them lost limbs. Some of them lost time. All of them lost something. All of them are being given something back, dignity, purpose, a place to belong. The airport director presents Rachel with a commendation for her work rebuilding the airport's veteran community. As Rachel accepts the plaque, her hand brushes against the inside of her jacket. The faded unit patch is still there, sewn into the lining where nobody sees it. The 8 faces. The 3 gold stars. She thinks about Sangin. About the weight of carrying people who couldn't walk anymore. About the moment she understood that saving lives isn't about accolades or recognition. It's about knowing, at 3 a.m. when you wake up gasping, that you did everything you could when it mattered most. The ceremony ends. The cameras flash. The airport director thanks her. Captain Whitmore salutes. The 50 veterans applaud. And Rachel Torres, Major, Purple Heart, 3-time combat medic, former TSA officer, now Deputy Security Director of Portland International Airport, looks at the faces of the people she hired and realizes something that took years to understand: she's not looking for redemption anymore. She's looking for purpose. She found it. Here. In a uniform. In a title that means something. In the faces of people who came home broken and are learning how to be whole again. The camera pulls back through the terminal as rain continues to hammer the parking lot outside. The closing words appear on screen: heroes walk among us. Sometimes in scrub, saving lives in the dark. If you've ever watched someone serve in silence, seen strength where others saw only uniforms or badges or quiet people doing their jobs, then you know what it means to see someone really see you back. Subscribe for more stories about the incredible people living extraordinary lives right in front of us. Like this video. Comment below with your own story of witnessing someone's hidden strength. And hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment when someone decides that doing the right thing matters more than everything else.